Halloween was always different for me. Instead of costumes and candy, the night of Old Hallows Eve was spent in the murk of the scariest places I could find. Urban exploration with a predictable twist. Abandoned asylums, gold rush era mine shafts, forests that were hotbeds of paranormal activity. Once I even found myself in the scorched basement of a high-rise building that had caught fire and had 32 people perish in its flames. But all those pale in comparison to this year's trip, because those places can be left behind. Coronado will stay with me until my dying breath. The Coronado military complex was not a place meant for life. Hugging the coastline of far North California, veiled by towering redwood forest, hundreds of feet underground, this complex got its start as a Cold War-era project that was shut down sometime in the 80s, until it was repurposed from 2002 to 2007. It had been left to rot ever since. This is all conjecture, of course. Coronado's facilities and operations are clandestine. We only knew of Coronado because of my friend and exploration partner, Mark. He's a freelance journalist who had gotten into contact with a local, willing to be our guide. We'd be killing two birds with one stone, a Halloween to remember for me, and an article to serve as Mark's holiday special. Whatever caused the abandonment of 2007 must have been severe enough for a hasty evacuation. They only had time to collapse the 3 maintenance tunnels and part of the main tunnel into the greater complex. Power and water were never cut, so the 700 feet of sloping tunnel into the main entrance soon became a hub for the community of bohemians and vagrants that occupied it. If you want a picture of what the settlement looks like, picture any major California underpass. The tents, billowing smoke from trash fires, open drug use. Coronado's got it all, except everyone's hooked up to a dangerous amount of extension cords. That might have been enough for a story, or a trip, but Mark and I were searching for that which straddles the edge of periphery. Deep within the bowels of Coronado lies a decades-long mystery, and it would have stayed buried for uncountable years if it had not been for the efforts of one man. Sergio Martin spent the last 12 years slowly cleaning out the rubble of the northernmost maintenance tunnel, until a few months ago, he gained entrance into the facility. The next few weeks spent exploring the compound led to discoveries so unsettling, he had no choice but to try to bring it to the media. We met him on the outskirts of the maintenance tunnel, tall and brawny, with long gray hair pulled back into a ponytail. The man looked exhausted. You weren't my first pick, you know. Last, actually. Went to the Times and the Post. All of them. Rejected unilaterally. So I kept going down the list until I was short of calling up the National Enquirer. How's that figure? You're just above them? He asked Mark. Well, Sergio, I'd wonder what kept them from such a juicy story. Honest opinion, I think they're scared. They have a memo that's passed around saying stay the hell out of Coronado. But that's not stopping me. It's not stopping me from trying to get the word out. Even if it's a small magazine like yours. Paranormal, is that your angle? As long as it's out there, it'll get traction and slowly people will come to know Coronado. I'm a freelancer. The publication I run isn't limited to the paranormal. I cover any oddity that comes my way. I'm eager to see what Coronado has in store for us. Don't be, Sergio grunted, gesturing for us to follow. Mark and I exchanged a look of wordless skepticism and trailed him until we came to the threshold of the tunnel. Large slabs of collapsed concrete barred the entrance, except for a small sliver. Light beamed out from within, and with a nod, Sergio led the way. It was a squeeze getting through. Into the chamber beyond, shelf-lined and cavernous. It was obviously a storage area, still lit by overhead fluorescents. We walked through into a larger room that looked like barracks stripped of their bedding, and beyond that was a central hub that split off into further corridors and rooms. So far, nothing stood out about the complex, sparsely decorated and industrial. a collection of concrete columns, brutalist architecture, and rusty scenes. A wooden table awaited us. Atop it were a few files and an old desktop computer. Sergio's gaze laid upon them. I walked forward and picked up the first folder, dated 1987, and with Mark peering over my shoulder, began to read it. Sergio theorized it had been left over from when it was first abandoned, and upon reuse in the 2000s, the files had been recompiled and heavily redacted. Reading through, I wasn't able to piece together anything cohesive. What I transcribed below is what is most legible and relevant. Note that these are mere sentence fragments. The majority of the documents were blacked out. Link with variable aspect, gate established. No discernible pattern for its function intervals. Emergent phenomenon increasing. Heightened security protocols approved. Cannot be effectively contained or utilized. No meaningful contingencies are viable. Existing protocols are mere formalities for the behalf of the unbriefed. I glared at Mark, who shrugged in response, unfazed by the mounting skepticism. He merely gestured to the next file. This one was more recent, dated 2006. It only had 3 photos, each with some text scribbled on the back in pen. The first photo was of a charred corpse. Its face had been censored out by a black bar. It hardly made a difference, as the burns were so severe, the body might have well been carbonized. The back of the photo had a single phrase: aftermath of contact with subject 12A. I picked up the next photo, flinched away at its gruesome nature, and forced myself to take a second and third look. Mark could only stare at it, transfixed. A room of eviscerated bodies, rags of flesh and entrails strewn about. Crimson stained all surfaces, and a pile of limbs lay at its center. Atop the hill of limbs, a scalped head was laid atop, eyes obscured by a black censor bar. The back of the photo held the descriptor, possible indicator of intelligence and attempt of communication. Flipping the photo back around and scanning the scene for a final time, I saw it. A crude drawing etched out in blood on the adjacent wall. A stick figure with no features beside 2 beady eyes. I practically threw down the photograph and moved on to the final one. I got the impression that it was taken hastily, in the throes of fear. The background was blurry and overexposed. The facility wall, shocked white. The void black stain as forefront was just off-center. I thought it was nothing more than a smudge. But the more I looked at it, the more definition it took. There was something angular in its form, poised and predatory looking. Maybe it was a glitch or my mind trying to make sense of what was nothing more than an indescribable blur. But with every passing moment, I could not help but feel as if some hidden dimension of form was scraping the surface of my psyche. I flipped over the picture and read this single word printed on the back. Juvenile. Mark's expression confirmed that it wasn't just in my head. What the hell are these? I asked Sergio. He shrugged and spoke. No idea. I have theories, but might be better left after you've gotten a better scope of the place. Come on. I think you should see the rest of the place before I show you what's on the computer. As we followed him, Mark took the initiative to ask how he came to Coronado. I was a professor once. You know, computer science. 2008 hit me hard. Harder than most. Lost the house, my kids, my wife, and my job. So I went north with nothing but a pack and my Camry. Found Coronado through a friend I made along the way. Was good back then, before it started getting crowded, before the fights for space got frequent. Even then there was something off. At night, reverberating off concrete, you'd hear things coming from deep within the complex. So I picked a tunnel and started digging, chipping away at the rubble every day. Those days turned into weeks, then months, until years passed by. Until finally, Sergio led us into another sloping tunnel, down into a lower level, then past the central chamber into a side room. The stench was the first thing that hit me, sharp and putrid, the perfume of suffering and decay. Lit by the dimmed fluorescence, a long corridor-like room, lined with dozens of beds on both sides, stood before me. Leather straps were fixed on each bed, and upon further examination, the tears and wrinkles revealed what must have been years of struggle. The last bed on the left still had its bedding, scrunched together and soaked through with old blood. The smell wafting off of it caused an involuntary shudder to echo throughout my body, as I got a taste of the untold agonies that had occurred here. He then led us into a small room that must have been a cell. Its door was sealed and reinforced. 6 inches of plexiglass that had a sizable hole punched through let us peer into the room within, barren except for the deep groves and slashed gouges deep into the concrete. Mark started to ask about it, but Sergio cut him off. "No idea. Come on, more to see this way." Once more, he led us to the central chamber, and towards the northern end, where a towering concrete double door barred entrance into what was surely the deepest part of the facility. There was no locking mechanism. With enough strength and leverage, one could haul the doors open. "What's that?" I asked Sergio. "Think it's the aforementioned aspect gate. Took weeks for me to work up the courage to pry it open and peer inside. Nothing but a brick wall beyond. A friend from the camp once took a trip down here. Swore to me that when he opened it, there was a dirt wall. He could have been on something at the time that deceived his eyes." "I want to take a look at what's on the computer," Mark cut in. Sergio nodded, and we trekked back to the desk a floor above us. Sergio had been able to extract some of the files through an exploit in the older computer systems. Though most of the data was half corrupted, there were a few surviving memos that stood out. 06-13-2003. Expedition 3C ended in near abject failure. 11 of the 12 crew were killed or MIA. 1 male was recovered. It was initially thought he was unlikely to survive more than a week. Due to some, as of yet unknown, condition, his blood was altered. The coloration of his blood is as black as pen ink, and the viscosity of syrup. His blood type is now undefinable. Seminal fluid is also tar-like in color and viscosity. Further testing has been requested and is pending approval. 03-27-2004. No abnormalities in test group 776. All 14 were successfully implanted with variations of component alpha version 4. Predictably, tissue samples have been unilaterally rejected and led to sepsis. Terminate survivors. Fluid changes have yielded promising results, but massive organ failure after 3 to 6 days is all but guaranteed. Embryonic forms have shown higher attachment rates to host bodies, but all end in premature death of the host, usually within 12 days. For this reason, the gestation period is still unknown. No preference for male or female host. The neck and chest appears to have the highest rate of successful attachment. The lack of new results with this latest sample has urged our directors to demand greater application of variables. All current subjects are to be terminated. Approval for subjects ages 12 and younger is pending approval. I formally submit possible variations in expectant mothers, preferably between 8 and 26 weeks. Addendum. Requests for both variables have been greenlit. Do you know how hard it is to pluck pregnant women off the streets and make sure no one will miss them? They're yours, but please be frugal. 09-19-2006. The increasing frequency of breach events has fast-tracked this project into early termination. 6 months is the best we can hope for now. In addition, all requests for new staff have gone ignored. Disposability is no longer a luxury we have. The only positive thing is we're on the cusp of a breakthrough. Now is not the time for caution. What the hell are we doing here? I asked. Want my opinion? Weapons development. Think about it, the Cold War arms race led to some colossally messed up discovery. They bury it for decades until the next big scare triggers yet another arms race, covert this time. They try and fail at controlling it, so they seal the place off, but also run for the hills because whatever they're messing with bites back hard enough to scare them badly. It's why they've never returned. Could have been an outpost of sorts. They do talk about expeditions. Maybe this is where they regroup and deploy, Mark said. Exploring what though? I asked. Don't think we'll ever know the truth of this place, Sergio replied. Mark turned to face me and spoke a single word. Gate. And wordlessly, we began the trek down. There it awaited us, like dual monoliths. And letting my touch rest on the cool rusted metal handles, I knew a great change was on the cusp of greeting us. Straining and grunting, we pried the gates open. I hoped to be met with a brick wall, a dirt barricade, an empty room. The gust of hot air that gasped out and washed over us dispelled any notions of being mundane. I didn't understand what I was witnessing at first. Like that stained photograph, it was as if my mind was shielding me from the horror of the truth. But as the shell-shocked seconds crept by, and understanding flushed over me, a scream caught on my throat. Pulsating flesh, deep crimson, blood vessels and capillaries. A hallway ring of muscle held the walls in place as they contracted and undulated. Squinting, daring to peek in, I saw occasional dangling light bulbs cast dim light across the expanse. I wondered if they had always been there, and the flesh grew over the hallway, or if they were part of the intestine itself. The corridor ended with another door, a simple red house door, with a brass handle that glinted its invitation. A fleeting moment of compulsion nearly caused me to walk across and answer its call, but a firm hand on my shoulder grounded me back to sanity. Mark's eyes were filled with horror, and without speaking, we both knew we had to leave. Scrambling back to the doors, we began the frantic push to seal the aspect gate. Our groans and efforts halted at a noise so subtle it might have gone unnoticed if our senses weren't on overdrive. A jiggle of a doorknob. The realization reignited our efforts, and we doubled the sail. Someone, something, was about to breach through the red door. Hurry up, Sergio hissed, as the creak of the door swinging open spiked panic and adrenaline throughout my being. Mark was throwing his full weight into the door, as the sound of the door creaking open drove me to do the same. The sickly squelch of steps, cautious at first, elicited a half scream from me. The thundering sound of something sprinting on organic tissue and fluids was the last push we needed to close the door in the moment that thing was about to emerge. A ghastly, gasping shriek tore through the corridor and assaulted us with images of the agony about to be inflicted. I lost the fight against the urge to look at it, but Sergio was faster, slamming into the gate and forcing it shut. Silence fell as soon as those doors closed. Sergio, what was that? Mark hissed, backing away frantically from the doors. I don't know. That's never happened before. Variables mess with him enough, and you might get a different outcome. We should leave now, I said. We emerged into the night sky, stars and moon masked by thick storm clouds, casting a shadow over us. So you'll write the article? Sergio asked nervously. Yeah. I'll omit some stuff and make sure no one finds this place. Don't think it's good for anyone to set foot in there. Yeah, you're probably right. I think I'll start looking for somewhere else to live. We parted ways with Sergio shortly after. The 3-hour drive home was silent, and when it came time for Mark to drop me off, he asked if he could crash. It's been days since, but neither one of us want to be alone. I don't think I'll be doing anything for Halloween next year. Mark and I had our fill last night. Northern California is Appalachia on the West Coast. Inexplicable occurrences, strange sightings, countless myths, and endless unsolved disappearances. I wonder what role Coronado has played in all of this, if any. I wonder if they were able to seal it back then, or if something breached past into the world outside. And I wonder if our expedition has opened a door for whatever lies beyond the aspect gate. I think I wanted it, at first anyways. Being a werewolf was such a chaotic and wild experience, constantly hanging on the edge of control, staring into the chasm of instinct and impulse, seeing how long I could teeter on the border of sanity. Melissa represented caution, discipline, and control. It had been like a sigh of relief, a release from responsibility, to be on a metaphorical leash. She grounded me, policed me, made sure I kept my nose clean. It started out self-imposed. I chose to stay in for the nights, chose to stay human. I couldn't let her find out about my condition, and on top of that, she was the perfect excuse to get me out of the weekly, if not nightly, hunts my pack was always dragging me along for. After a while, though, I'm not exactly sure when it stopped being self-imposed. After holding back from my carnal nature for a period of time, I began to crave it. But every time I decided to leave, my heart would start pounding. Now I'd start looking over my shoulder as I got ready, feeling guilty and, for some reason, apprehensive. These feelings strong enough to dissuade me from leaving altogether. I remember the first time I saw Melissa, standing in the threshold between the dining room and the kitchen, her hands on her hips, her eyes dull and calculating. My hand was on the doorknob, and she regarded me, frozen in that position, like an alpha would a pup who'd taken more than his fair share of a kill. "Where are you going?" she asked. I swallowed, my mind searching for an explanation. I couldn't tell her I was a werewolf going to run with the pack. You're not leaving for the night, are you?" she said, her head leaned to one side critically. It was a question, but it wasn't a question. I turned my head aside, my heart beating heavily in my chest. For a moment, indignation rose in me. I was a werewolf, a terrifying beast of the night. How dare this mere human instill such fear in me? My eyes happened to glance out the window, and I saw the empty trash bins still sitting down on the end of the driveway. Relief flooded through me, and before I could think of what I was saying, I spoke. "Of course not. I just happened to see the trash cans out there. Forgot to bring them in earlier, so I figured I'd run out and grab them now." At that, Melissa's thin line of a mouth curled into a smile, and she nodded. My quest for the trash cans had been approved. I turned away from her and opened the door. That's when she said it, quietly, but loud enough for me to hear. "Good boy." The hair on my arms stood up, and I paused in the doorway. My breath became heavier, as thoughts and emotions raced through me, but I shoved all the implications aside. The trash did need to be brought in. That was a few weeks ago, and now the leash felt more like a noose. Every rebellious thought I had, every time I tried to pull away, I felt this closing grip around my throat, as pulling away only tightened the knot. Eventually, however, the need to leave and to run, to hunt, was left so unsated, it grew to match the feelings that held me back. Over the course of a few days, I built up the courage to confront Melissa, and on the night I told my pack I would join them, I approached her. I opened the door to the basement, and the rattling sound of the washing machine bounced up the stairwell to my ears. I swallowed and descended. The basement was unfinished, and Melissa stood on the concrete floor in front of the washer and dryer, two shining white pieces of machinery in an otherwise gray and brown basement. A single incandescent light bulb with a pull string hung over Melissa's head, like a one-dimensional halo, casting hard shadows about the room. I reached the bottom of the stairs and waited. She was finishing up setting the dryer to run, and I didn't want to interrupt her. Finally, the dryer hummed to life, joining the running washing machine in a chorus of mechanical grumbles and clicks. Melissa heaved a basket of clean laundry up to rest on her hip, and she turned. "Oh, Terry, did you need something?" My voice caught in my throat, and I stared at her dumbly for a few moments. Her eyes narrowed at me, and a shiver ran down my spine. "Something the matter, Terry?" she asked, and I cleared my throat and steeled myself. "Some friends of mine are going out for the night, and I'd like to..." I stopped. As the noose tightened, Melissa's face hadn't changed, but somehow it had. Her gaze burned into me. I could almost feel my skin peeling and curling from the heat. My eyes fell away from hers and settled on the basket weighing heavily on her hip. I took a step towards her and reached out my arms towards the laundry. Here, let me take that. I can carry it upstairs, so..." My voice trailed off, as Melissa made no movements to allow me to take custody of the laundry basket. She just held her piercing gaze on me. "Some friends of yours are going out for the night, and you'd like to..." she echoed, using my exact tone until she curled the end of it into a question. My head dipped submissively, but I pressed on. "I'd like to..." I swallowed and furrowed my brow. No, my words would not be a question or a request. I raised my head to meet her gaze. "I'm going to head out with..." "And you're telling me this at 9:30 at night?" she asked sharply. My gut twisted. "Well, I didn't mean to wait so long. Time got away from me. Here, let me take that laundry basket. I didn't think we had anything planned for the evening, so I didn't think about mentioning it until now." I rattled that off as I reached again for the basket hanging on her hip. Again, she made no move to hand it to me. "Upstairs," she stated, her voice terrifyingly devoid of emotion. My entire body tensed up. I didn't move. Melissa stepped around me and started up the stairs, her footsteps heavy with the weight of the laundry. I listened to her ascend, but heard her stop at the top of the stairs. The floor creaked as she turned to regard me. "Come." My feet moved without thinking. My head stayed down. I traipsed up the stairs behind her and followed her as she walked into the living room and sat down on the couch. She set the basket down in front of her and patted the seat beside her. I moved to it and sat. "Help me fold this laundry. Since you've been staying here, I've got double the amount I usually do. After this, I've got 2 more loads coming through," she told me. My voice came out quietly. "Last time I tried to help you, you told me I was folding things the wrong way. And now you know the right way," she stated cheerfully. I felt heat began to rise in my chest. "You just want me to help so I can't go out." Silence hung in the room like a fog. Melissa said nothing, so I stood up. "Down," she ordered. My body almost listened instinctively, and that made me angry. I let out a snarl and faced her, my heart pounding in my chest. "You do not order me around like that. I will tolerate it no longer." Melissa turned her icy glare to me, and it took everything I had not to falter. I said, "Down," she repeated. My lips peeled back into a furious grimace, baring my teeth. "Who do you think you are?" Melissa's lip twitched, then her mouth creased into a frown. "Don't push it," she warned me. I laughed, incredulous. "Don't push it? You've been pushing me around for weeks. I'm going out tonight whether you like it or not." I stormed off towards the front door. "Terry, stay," Melissa barked. I felt compulsion grip my chest, but it only infuriated me more. Something in me snapped, and the burning sensation spread through my entire body. I was going to change. I couldn't stop it, and I was fine with that. I hunched over as my bones and muscles twisted and snapped and grew. I felt my face stretch into a pointed snout, and hair crawled through every inch of my skin. My teeth grew, my canines sharpened, my clothes ripped and parted into shreds. I let out a deep, guttural growl and spun to face Melissa. I would see fear in her eyes. I would see in her the same expression of apprehension she instilled in me I reveled in the thought of her shrinking away, terrified of my true form. But the woman was doing no such thing. Slowly she rose and stepped away from the couch, regarding me with something like disappointment and perhaps a bit of pity. Rage overtook me, and I lunged at her with a snarl. Melissa stood her ground, and I stopped an inch from her face. There was no fear, no apprehension, no sense of mortal danger from her. I was several feet taller than her in my true form, and yet somehow she looked down on me. Her shape didn't change, but in my head she grew. She grew bigger than me, and she was stronger than me. That's what her eyes said anyways. That's what her posture told me. I could not bring myself to argue. "Sit," she commanded, her face twitching into a moment of a grimace as she spoke. My jaw snapped shut, and I fell onto my hindquarters. Melissa's hand curled into a fist, save for her index finger, which pointed to the ground. "Lay down." Defeated, I let out a slight whimper as I willingly collapsed to the floor, placing my chin on the ground at her feet. "Now stay," she bid me, a hint of irresistible softness entering her voice. I stayed there for a few moments and did nothing but breathe. Melissa slowly lowered herself into a squat, and her hand rested upon my head. Her knuckles curled and she scratched through the fur between my ears. "Good boy," she cooed quietly. I felt my body relax, and a euphoric sensation spread through every inch of my being, and I have never been more afraid. I've talked about my road trip on this board before. Sick of working myself to death, I took the first vacation of my life last year. A beat-up, rebuilt Yamaha and a foolish sense of optimism carried me across the western United States on an adventure that seriously made me rethink everything I thought I knew about the world. I love Seattle. The bridge troll was the highlight. Gotta love a city that sees a bridge and goes, "You know what this needs? A giant concrete troll." Getting out of Seattle, however, was a total nightmare. Restricted to back roads by a motor that capped out at 40 miles an hour, I must have gotten lost at least a dozen times, despite all the help I received from baffled gas station attendants. So I was behind schedule when it came to finding my campsite. Some miles south and a little east of the city, there's a free campground. It's most often used by horse riders, and boy, you can smell it. That's actually what guided me in the last few miles. There's a gravel road off of a service road, and then a few crooked, unpaved paths off of that. The trail markers were all bent, broken, or faded. In the end, I had to follow my nose. I set up my old scout tent in the fading twilight. Mine was the only one there. I had the place all to myself. After a quick meal, I did my usual travel log spiel to my camera by lantern light before turning in. I'm not sure how long I slept. I know I checked the time, but I'll be damned if I can recall what it was. Something had disturbed my well-earned beauty rest, but I was too groggy to remember what it had been. I sat in a stupor, too alert to fall back asleep, but too sleepy to be totally awake. Something brushed the side of my tent, and suddenly, I was more awake than I'd ever been. I had done plenty of camping by that point. I was familiar with the sounds of the usual nighttime critters, from raccoons to coyotes. Nothing had ever bothered me in my tent before. Just sniffed around the campsite before wandering off, leaving me be. From the sound of the footsteps, there was walking on two legs. That was a first. My mind immediately jumped to the worst possible conclusion. It was a bear. There's a lot of conflicting information out there about how to deal with bears, and a lot of it depends on the type of the bear. Sitting there in the dark, with my heart beating in my throat, I had no way of telling which species I was dealing with. Shout out or play dead. I was 30 yards from a sturdy cement block outhouse. That might be a better shelter. As quietly as I could, I slipped my boots on and got ready to dash to the outhouse. The tent zipper seemed impossibly loud in the night as I worked it open centimeter by centimeter. I moved agonizingly slow. Once outside, I craned my neck around to see if the bear, if that's what it was was between me and the outhouse. With an incredible illumination of the Milky Way, I could see the campground clearly, all the way to the tree line. There was nothing out there. I could feel something watching me. It was like feeling an insect crawl along the back of my neck. There was no logical way for me to know that something had its eyes on me. But out there in the dark, in the middle of nowhere, all alone, I couldn't dismiss it. Still on high alert, I crept along and tried not to crunch the gravel under my feet too loudly. The outhouse was still my best bet. The door was propped open by a stone, but inside there was a heavy-duty bolt lock. I would have to spend the night surrounded by the smell of not only horses, but also of human feces. But I figured that was a fair trade for not getting mauled or eaten. My hand was on the latch when I heard an awful crunch of footsteps and gravel behind me. I kicked the stone propping the door open out of the way and slammed the heavy metal door shut, no longer caring about how much noise I made. Whatever was on the other side had thumbs. Something tugged on the door as I struggled to bolt it. I won, but it was close. There was a metal mesh along the top of the structure for ventilation. Through it, I heard the bellows and heavy breathing that matched my own. My phone was back in my tent because, well, I'm an idiot. There was no way to tell time. The same stupid impulse that brought me out here in the first place kicked in. I had to know what was out there. Hello? Silence. Maybe they hadn't heard me. And then suddenly, I heard, hello? I could have wet myself. I was in the right place for it. The voice was like my own, and the sound of it was a kick to the gut. I couldn't even tell you why it made me so uneasy. The sensation was like when you're walking upstairs and you're expecting another step, but your foot comes down on empty space. I'm sorry, I thought I was alone, I said. I'm alone? Every syllable was jarring. I'm sorry I freaked out. I didn't think there was anyone else here. Sorry, I'm here. You'd think now that I knew it was another camper. I would have opened the door, but I never did. Some deeply buried instinct kept me from taking my hand off the bolt. You scared the crap out of me. Are there more tent sites out here in the trees or something? I'm something. There are more. Their words made me sick to my stomach. Again, I couldn't have even told you why, only that they did. From their odd syntax, I guessed English wasn't their first language. Do you need to go? Use the bathroom, I mean, because I'm going to be in here a while. That wasn't a lie. I wouldn't have opened that door if it was my own mother on the other side. You need to go? Her grasp of English was improving with every sentence. There was something weird about that. Look, I'm sorry if I scared you, but you started it by creeping around in the dark. Now I won't come out. Can you go somewhere else, please? I'll be gone in the morning. I promise I just want to sleep in peace. You need to be gone. I promise you I creep in the dark. You won't be here in morning. Fear cemented my mouth shut. The more I spoke, the more they did. And I didn't want to hear their voice anymore. I'm sure that makes me sound like a bigot or something, but I had the feeling that I was feeding words to her, and the feeding was not pleasant. The same instinct that told me to keep quiet the first time kept me from running my dumb mouth off again. I was either dealing with someone who was not mentally well, or it was something else entirely. There was a threat in their words, or the way they spoke them, and I had no doubt they would be able to carry out that threat. I kept my hands on the bolt while they cramped, and the first rays of sunlight crept sluggishly through the mesh at the top of the walls. It wasn't until the sun was strong enough to make me sweat in my self-imposed prison that I felt brave? No, stupid enough to speak again. Hello? Are you still out there? Hello, anyone? There was no answer, which was the best outcome I could hope for. So I opened the door. My tent was untouched. The oppressive feeling of being watched had dissipated. I dressed and broke down camp in record time. My moped cranked to life, But it wasn't until I went to put my helmet on that I saw the footprint. I'd kicked that rock pretty far. It was close to my bike. Naturally, I went over to it. I had to know. In a clear outline of fresh mud, there was a single print on the smooth gray of the stone. Not human, but a hoof, like that of a unshoed horse or a goat maybe. It was so fresh, so vivid. It hadn't been there last night when I used the bathroom before I'd gone to bed. In the soft mud in front of the outhouse door were more of the same, some of them on top of my own boot prints. If you want to go looking for whatever the hell that was, be my guest. Just be careful with your words out there, because I figured out what was wrong with the voice when I watched the playback on my travel log video. It was my own.